Hello everybody, welcome to this week's live stream. Just to set everything up, as usual, if you have any questions, feel free to fire them in the chat. Hopefully the volume is okay. I think we have fixed the volume issues, but if it's a bit quiet at your end, just make sure you've got the YouTube volume button thing turned up, and then hopefully everything will be okay. So just to explain how these work, we do these every Friday normally, although there won't be one next week because I'm away. Do these every Friday, take a look at all the major markets, see what has been driving them, the levels to look out for, all that usual stuff. And then once I've done that, we'll jump in to the markets you want looking at. So you just put them in the chat. Don't spam the chat with the markets. Just put them in once, and I'll go through the chat once we looked at the major stuff and have a look. Just to the risk warning. It's important to understand this presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones and Capital.com accept no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences as a result. Spread bets and CFDs are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 76.25% of retail investor accounts lose money when spread betting and or trading CFDs with this provider. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Okay, let's get into it. So next week, I mean, clearly there's fair bits of news next week. I think the major stuff, though, is on Thursday. The Jackson Hole Symposium starts for central bankers around the world. So that runs, I think, for a few days from Thursday. So that could be interesting, given what's going on in the world at the moment with central banks having supported economies and worries about inflation and all that sort of stuff. Plus, US GDP is on Thursday of next week. So a lot to watch. Someone just said tough week. I think it has been a tough week over the last week, 2 weeks or so. I think I find it quite difficult at the moment when it comes to looking at trades and stuff, but more about that as we get into today. I think there are definitely some markets are definitely easier than others at the moment. I'd never say easy. To find out more about the company, Capital.com, go to Capital.com, not surprisingly. You can open a demo account, open a real account, download our app, all the usual stuff. Find out more about me and trading stuff during the week, although I haven't put much on through August, to be honest. I'm having a bit of a break in August, but davidjonestrading.com and find out more about the trading course that I run there. David.jones@Capital.com for any questions after this, and of course follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. We launched a stocks video site this week, not this week, a few months ago. If you look in the description of today's video, I think there is a link, there should be a link to the stocks channel in there. So if you're subscribed to our normal channel that we do all the trading stuff on during the week, if you subscribe to our stocks channel, we focus on US stocks on that one. Right, so I think we have seen markets spooked this week. There's been a number of things. There's been, I think, the increase in the Delta variant of the coronavirus around the world has spooked markets. We started off this week with some weaker than expected data from China, and we had the Fed statement this week saying that perhaps we'll see them start to withdraw support at some point in the future. So we have seen, I think, some wobbles for markets. We've seen a big break in crude oil, so we'll take a look at that. I put the video out on crude yesterday on the channel. I had to record it the day before because I was out yesterday. And we've seen that big support level break on crude. So we'll take a look at all of that. But I thought I'd start off with, for me, the market that, despite some of the wobbles this week, still has the clearest trend, US stocks. So it's the S&P 500, the broader US stock market index. We'll take a look at the Dow, the Nasdaq, the European indices, and the Nikkei as well. So this is where we are since March of 2020 on the S&P. And yes, it's had some big sell-offs. You can see it this week from Tuesday and Wednesday. But I think we need to keep it in perspective. It was only Monday of this week that we saw fresh all-time highs for the S&P 500, so that's the sign of a strong market. It's got knocked back, it's had a little wobble through the trend line, but for me, you know, I've still got a few open positions in the S&P. I'd still be looking to be a buyer because the trend is up. You know, no market moves in a straight line. So for me, any weakness for now still looks to be a buying opportunity. Fat Dan has put Porsche, please, in the questions. I'm presuming that is the stock Porsche you weren't looking at, or Porsche, I should say, not some random crowdfunding thing you want to do to buy yourself a Porsche. We'll have a look at that. It'll be interesting. So for me, the S&P still positive. You know, we've got this big support from mid-July down at 42.33. And for me, it's only if it took that level out would I start to worry about this trend. I had a quick look before it came on, actually, and I applied. Let me see if I can show you somewhere, just on some charting software I use. Because clearly, like a lot of people, you know, I don't just do short-term trading. I do some longer-term stuff as well, and plenty of us have pensions and ISAs and all that sort of stuff. And I have, you know, a fair chunk of stuff in S&P trackers from a long-term point of view, like ETFs that track the S&P. This software I was going to load is struggling to load, so maybe it's not going to work. But I applied a trailing 5% stop loss on the S&P, and it hasn't really taken that out through this run-up since March of last year. We've had a few little blips below it, and I think the trailing 5% stop comes in. Oh, hang on, it's just loaded. Let me load it up and just show you what I'm talking about. But I thought it was pretty interesting. So here we go. There's the S&P, and that's the trailing 5% stop. If I take it back, and it doesn't. I mean, clearly nothing works all the time, but it sort of fell below it in September, went sideways a bit, breaks out again in November last year, and we haven't really taken this out. So I think, you know, for me, at the absolute very least, I'd need to see the S&P below those mid-July lows, which would also take out that 5% trailing stop loss to suggest that, you know, this trend was in trouble. So for me, I'm still happy to be a buyer on dip. So, you know, the view for me on stock markets still the same as it always is every week. You know, that the trend is still up. I thought the Dow was interesting. If we take a look at the Dow, so we don't normally look that much at the Dow, but if we picked up, you know, it's the same sort of thing. You know, we've seen highs for the Dow this month, and the trend line might look something like that if we took it off the blip after the March lows. You know, we're still well above the trend in the Dow. We take a look at the NASDAQ. And I do think clearly, you know, the world of trading and investing has got a lot more short-term focused in the last 5 to 10, 15 years than it was in the previous 50 years. And I think people can get perhaps a little bit carried away with short-term volatility. But in the scope of the overall trends, you know, I think these trends are still up. There's the NASDAQ. You know, again, for me, the NASDAQ, lots of support coming in at 14.4. So it wouldn't surprise me if we saw these markets bounce back next week. Let's take a look at some of the European markets. Ftse, again, a little bit, perhaps pushed up to new highs in August the 11th, best levels since February, March of last year, and has come off quite hard. But again, I think the Ftse trend is perhaps a bit more questionable. But if we picked it off these lows, I don't know, down, if we went down to the March lows and then picked it off here, we're well above the trend on the Ftse. It has underperformed the US markets, but still broadly positive. Nikkei, that downtrend is still there in the Nikkei. I think I did say I had an old trade left over from December on the Nikkei that had started well and then hadn't. I think it was my oldest trade. I came out of it yesterday on this break below 27,000. It was almost, I think I came out pretty much near break even, or maybe slightly ahead, but not much. And it was almost a relief to finally get rid of that trade. But this downtrend in Nikkei is still going. The Japanese stock market going completely the other way to everything else since February of this year. So for now, if I was going to trade the Nikkei, I'd probably be more inclined to be a seller of strength rather than a buyer of dips. So I think it's interesting. I think with stocks, what's happened. But for me, the S&P is the one I watch day to day, and for me, I might be looking to add to my long position in the S&P on Monday of next week, and I think it's only if we start losing these mid-July lows we don't worry about a deeper sell-off. So that's that. Let's take a look at oil, because I think it's really interesting. I think that's probably the really interesting market at the moment, and perhaps the harder one. They're all a bit hard to call at the moment. But let's just take it step by step for oil, for crude oil. So at the moment we're trading below 63. So it's the worst level since May of this year. That is May this year, isn't it? So we're at a 3-month low on the price of oil. And we'd had various trends in place. And that was the trend off the April lows in oil. And it broke below it in August, a couple of weeks ago. But I thought, I always give it another go. If I see a trend line breaks, then for me, I think, right, let's give it another go and see what happens. And we've just lurched lower again now. So it is interesting. And I think this is perhaps the first time we've seen, and actually, if we were looking at it back in October, perhaps I think the same thing then, that there's the potential for this trend reversing. In October, it shook it off really quickly from early November and just ran away again. But are we seeing perhaps the first signs of a trend reversal in oil? I mean, it is off 20% pretty much, isn't it, from those highs in the 6th of July. So it's come a long way already. So I think it's an interesting market to watch going into next week. So for me, it is weak. It is the price of oil is weak. But I think this is why it's difficult. We've got a lot of support coming up from oil from the last few months. We had the lows in April at $60.50. We had the lows in May at $61.50. It's traded as low as 62 so far today. So I wonder, yes, we have broken out the trend line. Yes, the trend since beginning of July is still weak, but will we perhaps see something of a bounce? Maybe it's just a dead cat bounce next week, but I wouldn't be jumping on it and just selling it here. So let's see. Let's see what happens. But we do have this whole zone of support running up from actually 57 on oil to sort of 61.5. So I think it's going to be a really interesting week for oil. I must admit, if we saw a couple of days of it holding, I could be tempted to have one last buying attempt on the price of oil. But we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. Someone sent me an email this week, actually. I thought it was really interesting. So, what's the really important thing in trading? Is it the markets you trade? Is it how long you're in the trade? And for me, the really absolute important thing, not moving averages, not RSIs, is having an approach where your winners are consistently bigger than your losers, right? So if you're making 100 quid or 1,000 quid, or 10,000 quid when you're right, your losses have to be less than that. Otherwise, you're fighting a losing game. Let's not forget most people lose. And I thought a great example was actually the trades we did on the live stream a week ago. So here they are. So we did 2 trades a week ago, 13th of August. So 4 minutes to 3 and 6 minutes past 3 my time. So 2 trades, 1 winner, 1 loser. So we sold euro against the Swiss franc and bought Kraft Foods. Kraft Foods is losing money, so bought those at 37.64 and they're currently 36.56, so losing £41 on that. Euro Swiss sold it at 108 and it's currently 107, so making £124 on that. And this, for me, this perfectly encapsulates the importance of your winners being bigger than your losers. I don't care if I'm right only half the time or even less than half the time. But if I can be in a position where my winners are at least or getting on for twice the size of my losers, then I've got a successful trading strategy. But the reality is most people focus far more on being right more often than they're wrong and miss this bit of the equation. And this is why most people lose money when it comes to trading. It's trying to run those winners for as long as possible. Like the NASDAQ trade here. The NASDAQ trade has been running since the 8th of July, so we're 3 weeks into that. And it's up 400 quid, and the risk on that trade was probably about 250. So again, the profit is, about 1.5 times, maybe slightly more than the loss at the moment. So, and I think if you never get this right, you're always going to struggle to make money trading, which is why 3/4 of people lose money trading. But it's been a difficult week. I think it's been a difficult couple of weeks, actually. And I've not done much, hardly anything, in the way of new trades. But we'll talk more about that as we go through. So for me, I do wonder, next week, does the risk-reward favour one last go at buying oil and seeing what happens? But I think it's interesting with this support coming up on oil. So let's get into other markets. Let's talk about gold and silver. I think I've said I don't trade these markets much at the moment. I haven't done a trade, I don't think, for my own account on silver this year, because I think these markets are quite scrappy. You know, when you've got markets like the S&P 500, for example, that just goes up and sells off for a couple of days, then goes up again, there are definitely easier markets to trade. And I think, we had that flash crash in gold a week last Sunday. For me, the bias, the longer term trend for gold is still up. It's just a bit dull at the moment. So what would you do at the moment? It's almost slap bang in the middle of the recent range. So I probably wouldn't do anything. If I had to do anything, I'd be a buyer on dips, but I'd rather sit it out for the moment and see what happens. But, broadly speaking, the trend, we're 3 years into this trend now for gold. For me, it's still up. It's just pretty dull day to day. And silver is even duller. Silver is a really strange market, or has some strange followers, I should say. Some of the stuff we get on our YouTube videos for silver is bizarre. People absolutely tie themselves in conspiracy theories about why the price of silver isn't $300 an ounce. And they're convinced the market's rigged and everything else. And I always think, well, if you're convinced the market's rigged, why would you trade that market in the first place? Anyway, people are strange. But for me, the trend on silver is sideways. It's a market that, for me, there hasn't been any trades there this year in silver. We had that flash crash last week, the conspiracy, whoever was behind it, whatever. But it held above the lows. It did hold above the 2170, 2150 lows in silver. We had a bounce back. It hasn't lasted long. I'd still be if I had to do anything, I'd still be tempted to be a buyer. But not today, maybe. Or maybe today, I don't know. But I'd put my stop loss probably the other side of that spiky low. But I think it's such a messy, scrappy market in silver. I'd rather trade something that was a bit clearer for me. So I think it's interesting, if you're a fan of silver, to watch it next week and see what happens if we get a retest of these lows. I do think if it starts trading below $21.50, yes, the trading lizards. If it starts trading below $21.50, we could see a much bigger sell-off in silver. But for me, look at the last year, it's been directionless. You put your money into silver last August, you're slightly down. When other markets, there have been a whole host of other markets that have been much more interesting, I think. So for me, it's a popular one with our viewers. So it's one we always do a video on. But I just think it's a difficult market to call, and it's been that way for a while, and we're broadly sideways. So I've got nothing really to add to silver at the moment. So then we did that, did silver and gold, not the most interesting markets, I don't think, at the moment. We look at pound against the dollar. It had been a pretty sideways market for a while. And this is why I think they're hard to call at the moment. Because again, for me, let's look at the trend for the year so far, right? We had quite a bit of strength running into Feb. And then since Feb, it's been sideways. It's been clobbered this month. It's dropped from 139.5. It's dropped 350 points or so. But we're back to a zone where perhaps, we're at the bottom of the range. Are we going to see the buyers come back in? We don't have a clear medium-term uptrend or downtrend, but we do have a definite range with definite extremes. So again, for me, if I was going to do a trade on the pound, I'd probably be a buyer, and I'd be looking to have my stop the other side of the lows, whatever the lows are, 135.50, something like that. So I think it's interesting to watch into next week to see, do we basically see history repeat itself like we saw a month ago when it was down here? We saw the market rally 300 or so points, maybe even more. Do we see a bit of strength come back after some of the dollar strength we've seen this week? Let's see what happens. And the same for the euro. The euro is still a bit weaker today, I think, but the euro has fallen out of this euro-US dollar. This is fallen out of that trend from March last year. And it is still weak, But again, we're back into this zone from September, November last year. 116 to 117 had been a major turning point for euro US dollar. Is it going to turn again this time round? I have to say, for me, from playing the odds, I would be a buyer. Not yet. I'd wait for it to stop. I'd wait for it to stop going down. But I think it's interesting, and it's pretty. For fans of RSIs, it's oversold on the RSI. So it's still a bit of a wait and see market, I think, for me at the moment. But let's see what happens. But over the next couple of weeks, but I would be expecting a bit of this weakness for the euro to go away. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. And then the cryptos, the crazy world of the cryptos. I think it's positive. Bitcoin. We had that break. Bitcoin and Ethereum. We had that break the other week. Being in the sideways range, blah, 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 blah. Support down around 29, couldn't get through 42.5. We had the break first week of August. And for me, it looks like a valid breakout. We've seen it push up, it sells off. So for me, come down to the trend line. I think I did actually buy Bitcoin. I know I always say I hate cryptos. I did do a small trade on Bitcoin just to see where it goes from here. Again, of course, you can't trade leveraged Bitcoin if you're a UK resident like what I am. You have to buy a portion or a fraction or a Bitcoin. So for me, perhaps we'll see it recover a bit more from here and run back up towards 57.5, 60,000. Let's see. But I think a lot of that crazy momentum we saw in January, March has gone from the market. So I think if it does go higher, perhaps it takes a bit longer to get up there. Interesting enough, there's a great quote from the 1920s that you might be familiar with if you were around in the 1920s. When the shoeshine boys start giving you tips, that's the time to get out, referring to the stock market. I was at the dentist this week, and I heard a couple of the dental hygienists talking about Ripple, XRP, explaining how to open an account and how to buy it and how high it was going to go. So perhaps that shows just how peak crypto we are at the moment. Let's see what happens. But so I did a little go on Bitcoin. The same for Ethereum. We had the break in Ethereum through 2.9. We've dipped back to it, nice little entry, and it's positive. So for me, I'd change my mind if we dipped back much into that range from before. Perhaps it all looks like a failed breakout. But positive, I think so far. That's it, isn't it? That's all the usual stuff we've done. We've done stock indices, done currencies, done crypto, gold, silver. Right, let's take a look at some of the questions coming in. Someone said gold. We looked at gold. I tell you what was interesting. The trade I did do this month was dollar Canada, and I think we did it on the live stream. Dollar Canadian dollar. I can see someone's mentioned that. I'm quite proud of this trade. It was a really good reversal trade, this one. It took a bit of time to come round, but we'd had this downtrend in the dollar against the Canadian dollar and broke out. I think I sold it on one of the live streams here, treating that as a false break. It got stopped out. But you can see how it's built, and I ended up buying in for my own trades, probably here, so it was underwater for about a week. But I do wonder if we're seeing, we're seeing clearly dollar strength here. This is dollar against the Canadian dollar. It's been a good week for the US dollar this week. But we're seeing that dollar Canada trend since June evolving. Would I buy it here if I wasn't already? Probably not. But an interesting one, I think, to watch next week if you wanted some dollar exposure to see, do we get a sell-off from here? If it pushed back towards 126, 127, looks like a good entry point if it happens. But you can see it's quite a dramatic turnaround, which leads me to the dollar index. I could see someone mention the dollar index. So let's take a look at that. The dollar index has, and I did say, didn't I, if you go back to the earlier live streams, right at the beginning of the year, is this going to be the year of the great dollar comeback? And finally, it is looking like that, although it's early days still. And I thought it was interesting, then the moves in the dollar index, so this is the dollar against a basket of other currencies. My second oldest trade after the Nikkei, which has gone this week, is a dollar index long, and I bought it at a really poor entry here somewhere. So it's been slightly in profit and then quite a lot against me, and then it's back in profit again. But I think it's interesting what we've seen with the dollar index. Broke out of the downtrend from March, April this last year. Look how strong that floor is, 89.20. Has been a good floor for the dollar index. Breakout over the last couple of days. An interesting market to watch next week, I think. We've got quite a bit of resistance coming in from 94.80 through to about 94.30. So perhaps a bit more back and forth. But I think that's an interesting market, and it does show you the strength of the dollar index over recent. Oh, here we go, 28th of May. We've still got that trade on here. So we did it on the 28th of May in the live stream, 3 minutes to 3. So how long has that been going? 3 months. So bought at 90.22. It's a cut, 300 points in profit at the moment, up 270 quid. So that would have been 100 quid risk. So that's worked out pretty well, that trade. So probably need to move the stop on that. But that looks strong. So I think that's an interesting market to watch next week. Copper crashed. Yes, I saw that. I do still have an open position on copper. So that caused me a bit of pain this week. I have to say, though, it got absolutely clobbered, like you say, this week. Where was it a week ago when we were looking at it? It was 436. It closed last week, and it touched 4. So it dropped 10% by yesterday. I have to say, that trend is still up for me. Oh, no, it's not. What am I talking about? It's broken. But that for me is almost give it one last chance. So if I didn't have a position on, I'd be a buyer. But I do think if it starts to break next week below 385 to 4 next week, then it looks like that trend has changed in copper, which is a shame because it's been a good trend. But let's see, that's an interesting market to watch. But perhaps that's the trade we're going to do. That's the live stream trade for today. We do have an old one in there from the 26th of April, which I probably should have moved the stop on at some point on that, but I didn't. Let's do a trade in copper. So this is the last chance for the trend trade in copper. So the low yesterday was 396. I think these lows back here are important, 385. So let's go 390. So we'll do a trade in copper, put a stop at 390. So if it breaks yesterday's low, we'll be out of the trade. But in terms of risk reward, it's an interesting one. So we'll risk 100 quid as usual. Look at that, bang on 100 quid. What a fluke. So we'll buy copper. There we go, done. So bought 620 copper, wherever it was. Where do we buy it? In a second. 412, we bought it. So let's see what happens. I think it's an interesting market to watch next week. Though that and oil, oil is perhaps more pronounced of a downtrend, but are these moves perhaps overdone? Let's see. I think if it breaks below 395, though, we could see a deeper sell-off in copper. Canadian dollar, yeah, we looked at that. So someone asked, what would your stop loss and take profit now in copper? We just did that. But yeah, for me, I think if I was giving it a wider stop loss, I'd go 380 probably, which is 31 cents away from it is now. But let's not forget, it's moved 40 cents in the last week. So I think another mistake people make is they set their stop losses too tight and just get taken out in the noise. So let's give it a bit of breathing room. Let's see what happens. It'll be interesting to come back to it. DJT. What's DJT? DJT. Don't know. If you can just. Do you mean the Dow Jones Transport Index, or do you mean something else? Don't think we covered that anyway. Sterling against the Aussie dollar. Let's have a look at sterling. Perhaps we'll look at the Aussie dollar as well, because that's been really weak, the Aussie dollar. And we're seeing sterling being really strong against the Aussie. Excuse me. It's interesting. We've looked at this before, because I put a line on it before, so we must have looked at that in a previous live stream. The breakout during July, and it's really motored since then, hasn't it? So for me, I'd be looking to be a buyer of the pound against the Aussie dollar. The only question, as usual, is where would your stop go? I think it'd be interesting if it sells off next week, perhaps near towards 188, 189, something like that. But that trend is up, so I would be a buyer of the pound against the Australian dollar. I mean, the Aussie has got clobbered this week. If you look at Australian dollar, US dollar, and the New Zealand dollar, I think, partly because of the lockdowns again. But that had been a great trend again on the way up. But some good trades in the Aussie this year. But, definite for me at the moment, that trend in the Australian dollar against the US dollar is down. But it's another interesting one because we are sort of hurtling towards what was old support. Hang on a second. Let's just pick up on this. Well, we're still a bit, but around down about 70, 69.90 to 70 is interesting. So I wouldn't perhaps go short here personally because my stop would be too far away, near, and the risk reward isn't right. But I think it's an interesting market to watch. And I missed out on a trade. I was going to go and short back here somewhere, and I didn't, and then forgot about it. So I missed out on a good trade there. But that's how it goes, isn't it? Bought the S&P yesterday. Should I worry about the price approaching 4,500? I don't know. Should you? I mean, for me, it depends on your time horizon, doesn't it? But for me, if you bought it yesterday, you're doing well, aren't you? So we're on highs for the day so far. I mean, for me, it's all about your time horizon, isn't it? I've got quite a few open positions in the S&P. The trend is still up. I'm happy to run it. If you're only looking to get in for a few days, you'd have a different view. But only you can say, I think. Brent crude, just have a look at Brent crude. Brent crude is going to look, in terms of the shape of the chart, pretty similar to thingy. Arguably, it's still above its trend from the March, April lows. We don't have 3 touches on that trend line. Big support. So this is interesting, actually. I mean, it is like US crude, but big support for Brent coming in at $64. It's where did it trade to today? 64.70-ish. So it'll be interesting. I mean, again, I would still, even though the price has crumbled this month, I must admit I'd still be looking to be a buyer. Let's see how well that turns out over the next week or so. But I do wonder, with this big support coming in, is it a bit overdone? Only time will tell. Still weak today, but again, a difficult one at the moment. But interesting to see what happens. We looked at crude oil. Porsche, let's look at Porsche. It's interesting, the whole car market at the moment, because no one can get any, they've all dialed back, haven't they, on production because of the chip shortage, the global chip shortage. And I don't know where you are, but here in the UK, second-hand car prices are nuts. There's a thing in the UK called We Buy Any Car, and I've got a 5-year-old car I've been trying to sell, or thinking about selling, and the price jumped from, I think, 20 grand to 20,600 on We Buy Any Car in the last 2 weeks. So I'm desperately need to give it a polish and sell it. Anyway, enough about that. Here's the chart of Porsche. So the Porsche share price, great performer. Where's it gone? So from March of last year, €30, €30, 100 euros this year. Again, for me, I think that trend has clearly lost momentum, but for me, that trend is up. So for me, I would still be tempted to be a buyer. And I think it's going to be really, we've got this big old support coming in around 80 euros. So for me, interesting to see what happens next week. Wouldn't be a buyer today because it's still weak. But interesting to see if it can snap back from these levels down here. So that's an interesting one to watch next week. I don't personally watch individual stocks that much, but that is interesting down here. But I think, stocks tend to be normally a lot less volatile than other markets. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with sitting on your hands for a week and seeing if things turn around. Because if things do turn around and we go gunning back for the old highs up above 100, that would be an interesting trade, wouldn't it? So let's try and come back to it. We're not doing the live stream next week. Let's come back to it in 2 weeks and see what's going on with the Porsche stock price down here. Right, China 50 index. Let's have a look. Yeah, those China. Alibaba, we did a video on Alibaba this week for the stocks channel. I mean, that stock price has been absolutely clobbered this year, so as a lot of the Chinese stocks have. I wonder, what do you think? I think, do you know what? I think the adventurous trade here would be to be a buyer. Because let's go back to, we've got it going back, let's pick up on 2019 on that trend. That's maybe not too relevant at the moment. But for me, let's pick up on, again, some of the levels. And it's had a big sell-off, but we had big support down at 14.7, something like that. So for me, in terms of risk reward, it's an interesting trade. Be a buyer at, is that a trade we'll do? Should we do a trade on let's do a trade on China index. So it is going against the trend that's been down since Feb, but is it trying to build a base down here? Let's see. Let's put a stop in at, what was that low? That low was 14,575. Let's go 14,400 for a stop. Okay, so 14,400 for a stop, and we'll buy. We won't buy that many because that's $2,000 risk. Maybe it's too big for me to trade it. Can I buy 0.4? Can I buy 0.3, 0.2, 5? I'm trying to get my risk to be 100 quid or so. There we go. I don't know if it'll let me do that. Let's see. If I buy 0.23 and taking the view that is the market trying to build a base here, but if it breaks to 14.4, I'm out. Oh, there we go. We did it. So we bought 0.23 of the Ftse China A50. Let's see what happens. Interesting. Perhaps a little bit dangerous, that trade. But let's see what happens down here. But it's an interesting market to watch. Chipotle, whatever they're called. Chipotle. Let's have a look at those. I think they're trading near multi-year highs, aren't they? I think. Yeah, there they are. I mean, that's still positive for me, isn't it? I mean, that's, the question as usual is where would your stop go? But for me, the fact, look at some of the sell-off we've seen in markets this week, and we haven't seen it in this one. So for me, if I had to do anything, I'd be a buyer. The only question is, where does your stop go? I would probably go 1760 for a stop. This is on a shorter-term chart. This is an hourly chart. That's what I would do for a stop. But I always do struggle with these ones that have gone up like a rocket as to where to get in. But that's just me. Quick reminder, to find out more about the company, go to Capital.com. Find out more about me and trading and stuff, davidjonestrading.com. And drop me an email, any questions, david.jones@capital.com, @JonesTheMarkets on Twitter. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube now, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, subscribe to the channel. And we do lots of different market stuff during the week. But follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Right, let's get back into it. China 50, we did that. Kingspan Group. Is that a UK stock, isn't it? I can't remember what they do. Kingspan Group. Holding company, engaged in building envelope solutions. Is it UK? Oh no, it's euros. Okay. The trend looks good, doesn't it? It looks a bit of a weirdly traded one, but it reminds me a bit of that trend on carbon credits when we looked at it a few months ago. Just gradually grinding its way higher, isn't it? So for me, I'd be a buyer. Where would my stop go? I'd probably have it down at least at 80 at the moment. But that's a rubbish trend line I've drawn, by the way. But a great little trend chugging away there in Kingspan. Natural gas. I do have a trade on that natural gas. I've got a trade in this account that is a massive £1 in profit. And I've got a trade on my own account as well for natural gas. And I do think... I don't know, natural gas is a strange market, and I often say that when we look at it. It can get really volatile. But for me, the trend is still up in natural gas. So I did my own trade in here somewhere. So it's been slightly up. But for me, that trend in natural gas is still up. And if I was going to buy it now, the absolute closest I'd have my stop would be the other side of yesterday's low, which was 374. I'd probably be more inclined to give it a bit more wiggle room, blah, blah, blah. But for me, that trend off those April lows, so we're 4 months into that now for natural gas, that trend is still up. I mean, it is, it can be an absolute nuts market, as we can see here in the past, when it gets going. But, we've seen a bit of a pullback, bit of a turnaround yesterday, bit of strength today. So for me, that trend is still up in natural gas. So another interesting one. Is Starbucks losing some steam even? Nice one. Let's see what you've done there with the words. Let's have a look at Starbucks. Let's have a look at that one. Starbucks. It looks quite interesting, that, because we've got this big trend in Starbucks going back to, we've clearly looked at it before because the trend line's there. Going back, so I picked it off the April low after the bounce back. For me, I would absolutely be a buyer of Starbucks at the moment. And then clearly nothing today is financial advice. If you buy it and then come out with a profit warning next week and they're trading at 10 cents a share, don't blame me. But for me, we saw, what I'm guessing is all-time highs for Starbucks in July. Sold off. It's come off a lot, as you say. It's come off about 10%. But for me, big support coming in at 108-ish. So I would, if I was a buyer now, I'd put a stop at 108. Should we do that trade as well? Should we go crazy and do three trades today? Let's go. Let's give it a bit more room. Let's do 106 on Starbucks. So we'll do a stop at 106. How many are we going to buy? 15 by 15 with a stop at 106. We've got risk of 95 quid. Let's see. So for me, again, okay, it's come back to the trend line. It's had a little dribble below it. For me, it doesn't really mean anything. So I'm quite happy to be a buyer and see if we get a bit of a run back up to 127 from here. So that's an interesting one. Sterling yen. Sterling yen, I've got one last trade left in sterling yen. I think it has been my most profitable market this year, but I am out of most of them. But that trend is still up. The trend in since March of last year on sterling yen is still up. And again, if I had to do a trade now, I'd be thinking about being a buyer. This has been a big level in sterling yen, 147-ish, 147.40. So I think it's another interesting market to watch next week. It was a great market here, great trend there. It's been a bit directionless and a bit floppy over the last couple of months or so. But interesting market to watch. 147 is the big level in sterling yen. We looked at dollar yen. Alibaba, we did do a video on Alibaba this week on our stock channel. What's your opinion on owning, we'll have a look at Alibaba, on owning physical? I presume you're referring to physical silver or gold. I don't hold it. I'm quite happy just to trade an ETF or something. And I know there's a whole rant about how you don't own the real thing if you own the paper. I don't care personally. Your view might be different. For me, I've got no interest in owning any gold bars. But if you've got any gold bars you want getting rid of, feel free to send them to me. But for me, I'm happy to trade the paper version. Alibaba is interesting. Clearly, the trend is down. Since October last year now, the trend is down. And it is still weak, but we're running into a big area of support, you know, from 146 through to 160. So I think it's a potential turnaround stock, Alibaba, but I would not be in a hurry to buy just yet because that trend is still down. I think if there is a time to buy Alibaba, there'll be lots of time to get back on a recovery, but it's still pretty weak. You know, if it broke below 160, you'd be looking at perhaps May 2019 lows at 148. So it is interesting down here, but weak. Nikola, the electric vehicle or electric something company, isn't it? Something to do with electric cars, isn't it? Zero emissions transportation system provider. I think if you really wanted to buy them, it's quite interesting actually. I mean, I often say with some of these crazy volatile stocks, they don't appeal to me because the volatility is just nuts. And in Nikola, they've gone from an April low of $9 to nearly 20, and we're back at 9. I think actually if you really had to buy them, now is the perfect time to buy them, if you really had to buy them. And that doesn't mean, of course, they can't go down. But we've come back for a retest of the old lows, and it has actually dribbled below the old low. So the old low was $9.30. It's traded down to $9 this week. So if someone said, right, you've got to buy them, right, I'd buy them and I'd put a stop at $8.50. I think if they start breaking below, again, these lows, the risk is we're going to see a sell-off. I mean, that is a heck of a move though, isn't it? July 2020, $75 a share. Today, what, $9.20, whatever they are, $9.50. Interesting though, to see, do we see the same thing? Do we see the people who think they missed out last time round jump on it this time round? Interesting one to watch next week. Not a stock for me, but an interesting one to watch next week. Let's see what happens. I'm currently short Euro Aussie. What do you think? It's a bit of a race to the bottom for those two, isn't it? Euro Aussie dollar moment. They've both been quite weak. I mean, I mean, from a trend point of view, I couldn't argue with it because that trend has been down. The latest bit has been down since June. If it was me in the trade, I would just be very conscious of these big levels coming up. Oh, this is Euro, US dollar. Ignore all of that completely. Why did that come up with Euro, US dollar? You're short, oh, that's a completely different looking chart. You're short, okay. So you're short, I would say, and again, it takes two sides to make a market, doesn't it? There are always buyers and sellers. For me, the trend since March has been up. It's spiked up today to its best levels since December 2020. If I had to go short today, I'd be going against this trend. I would put my stop somewhere above the most recent highs. And of course, I'm not saying you should do that. But if I had to go short Euro Aussie today, that's what I'd be doing. And it is overextended. I mean, it's pretty overextended on the RSI. So some sort of sell-off from here is not out of the question. Good luck with whatever you decide. Currently on a sell in Euro Aussie. Palladium, yeah, Palladium. Palladium and platinum, both taken big hits, I think. We've got about 10 minutes left of this. Look at that. Palladium is absolutely great market. Great market for parts of this year. I think I've said before, absolutely brilliant market in 2019 and early 2020. I think a lot of my trading profits in 2019 came from Palladium because it just kept going up. It was a great market. But look at it, absolutely knocked Ftse out of that trend this week. So for me, I think I'm out of everything in Palladium. Interesting to see what happens if it starts trading back to 2,200, and it's not a million miles away at the moment, but big support going back to September last year down there. Let's see what happens. Perhaps the move has been overdone. Still looks weak today. An interesting market. This is why I think lots of markets, personally for me, are quite hard at the moment because we're seeing a lot of trends either coming under pressure or coming to an end. So tricky markets to call. So let's see what happens next week. Tesla. I think Tesla, for me, I think we do have a position. We've got a position in here on Tesla. There we go, from the 18th of May. Bought at 580, they're currently 678, so that trades in profit. I mean, for me, I think that the trend on Tesla is still up. I mean, they had, there's an inquiry, isn't there, into the whole, or something going on with the whole automated driving thing. But for me, that trend is still up. It's having a little flip around the trend line. But for me, I think that was that the sell-off on the inquiry earlier this week? But for me, I'd be a buyer of Tesla. The closest I'd have my stop would be the other side of 620, maybe a bit further. It might be some time before we see $900 a share again. But for me, that bias is still up in Tesla. But an interesting one. US Steel. What's the S? Hang on. What's the S&P doing? Is the S&P racing away? It's not. It still looks. Yeah, it's pretty strong, isn't it? Let's have a look. US Steel. Let's have a look at US Steel. So this is the stock US Steel, isn't it? Incorporated, founded in 1901. That looks pretty weak, doesn't it? It looks absolutely cratered, US Steel. So that is, that's a 5-minute chart, you idiot. If I put it on a daily chart, it might look a bit different. There we go, it does look a bit different. So for me on US Steel, I think it's a bit messy, isn't it, at the moment? It did punch out to its best levels since about 2018. So we are at a 3-year high for US Steel. We were a couple of days ago. So for me, I would be a buyer. I'd be looking for a buying opportunity. I wouldn't be a buyer today because it's still weak. This trend has all got a little bit messed up. So there we go. Looks like that. So for me, I would be a buyer. The difficult thing is, where does your stop go? I would probably want my stop the other side of $20. So if it was a bit weaker again from here, it could be an interesting opportunity for me for next week. So let's see. Let's see what happens. Robinhood. Yeah, let's look at Robinhood. Good call. So Robinhood, of course, floated just in the last couple of weeks, didn't it? Robinhood Markets. And they had that crazy run-up, which I think I said last week was an obvious short, and I didn't go short, but it was an obvious short. Should have done that. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. And again, should have shorted it last week when I was talking about shorting it. I think it's interesting, Robinhood. I mean, we don't have any data, obviously, because it only came to the market on the 29th of July. So it's only been trading for less than 3 weeks or so. Still looks weak though, doesn't it? So for me, it's interesting to see what it's doing, but I don't know. I wouldn't do much. You could go short, I suppose. If you were going short now, where would your stop go? I mean, it's traded as high as $45 today. If I was going short now, I'd probably want my stop above these 19th of August highs, at least above 47, something like that. But then on the other hand, it got knocked back to these lows at 42. So I don't know. Tricky one, Robinhood. Not enough data. Interesting one to keep coming back to, but not that much data to go on. But it is still drifting, I think, off those highs, isn't it? Rolls-Royce. Is Rolls-Royce a buy? I doubt it very much from my memory of the chart, but maybe it is. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Because I think it's got absolutely over the years. Oh, actually, no, maybe. It's got absolutely, I mean, that's the longer term chart for Rolls-Royce, just to put it in perspective. So Rolls-Royce stock traded as high as £11 in July 2018, and it's currently £1, £1.10 at the moment. It's just a bit boring, isn't it? That's the year so far, Rolls-Royce. So we are in this sideways range, aren't we? And we're almost slap bang in the middle of the range. So it looks like it has at least stopped going down for now. For me, it's not a trade. Your view might be different, and if it is, good luck. But for me, you know, I'd be a buyer if it slipped back towards 90 if I had to. But it's such a messy old chart. It's not really one for me, to be honest. Aluminium. Let's take a look at aluminium. Aluminum. Aluminium spot. No, I never look at this, but I think it's an interesting market, though. I think we only started listing it earlier this year, so we don't have much data. I suppose, is it mimicking US steel? Does that make sense? I don't know. I don't know anything about metals. But for me, the trend for this year is clearly up. It's just, it has been a bit sideways since May. For me, if it got knocked back towards 2,400, it looks interesting. It's perhaps a little bit boring at the moment, but for me, the bias, I would say, is still up in aluminium. So let's see. Euro sterling. I've got a trade on euro sterling, and it was in profit for a while, then it wasn't, then it is. And I looked at the chart today, and I thought this is probably the best my trade has looked on euro sterling today. I did wonder, I did the trade back here somewhere, or maybe here. So it's been going for a few months anyway, it's gone nowhere. Or it's actually gone against me. And I did it based on this trend. Has this trend broken on euro sterling? Blah, blah, blah. Are we going to see a euro recovery? Clearly, we haven't had that. But I thought what was interesting this week, or whenever it was, a week ago, it broke below the lows for the year, the April lows, but it didn't get any follow through. And I thought that could be an interesting point, that the fact it's broken below and there's been no follow through. And it's bounced back. So let's see what happens. So I would personally still be leaning to be a buyer of the euro against the pound. But if it broke below 84.50, I will probably be out of my existing trade. So it's a bit of a rubbish, scrappy market at the moment. That trend since May has been down, so this could still run out of steam and break down. Bit of a difficult market to call, but I thought it was interesting that it broke below the lows, but we didn't get any follow through, and it's bounced back really strongly. So perhaps we will see a gradual recovery. But I think there are easier markets than euro sterling at the moment. You did miss crude. We did do crude oil, actually, so you can watch the recording of that. AMD. I think I've got a trade on AMD for myself at the moment, I think. Yes, I have. And it's underwater at the moment. But for me, the trend is most definitely up on AMD. The reason I bought it, I think I bought it earlier this week. We had a breakout, market sells off, stabilizes, so I've bought in, and I've got a stop probably in here somewhere. So for me, if I didn't have a trade already, it's broken out through those January highs, quite a move off the breakout. You could argue, I would argue, and don't forget, no one knows, no one's got a crystal ball. I would argue the trend from May is still up. So I think it's interesting, AMD, some interesting strength today. If I was a buyer now, the closest I have my stop would be the other side of 100 somewhere. So let's see what happens. We've only got, oh God, I'm running out of time and I've got to dash off somewhere. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to have to just whiz through some stuff. Coinbase, let's look at that because it could be interesting. Coinbase, so the crypto exchange that floated earlier this year. I mean, Coinbase has made a base ahead of 200, hasn't it? We're trading at 250 at the moment. So again, if I had to do something, we haven't got much data, only going back to April when it floated. Arguably, I'd be a buyer with us, but I'd want to stop the other side of 200 on Coinbase. Not surprisingly, given perhaps the recovery in some of the cryptos in recent weeks, it did lift Coinbase into August, but it's an interesting one to watch We looked at Bitcoin. We've looked at Bitcoin, and I think unfortunately we are going to have to. Petrovac. Let's have a look at Petrovac. We haven't looked at those for a while. Let's have a quick look at Petrovac. Provider of oil field services to the international gas and oil industry. Blah blah blah. Okay. So for me, it's again. I mean, look at the. You know, if you've watched any of the stuff I do, I'm a big fan of trends. The trend in Petrovac. I mean, look at that. You go back to 2012. It's just been down. We nearly got a 10-year downtrend for Petrovac, because they were 17.50 back then, and they're 0.96 now. So for me, I would have absolutely no interest in a stock like this. If you have and you make a fortune, brilliant, good luck to you. I suppose if I had to do something, I could be tempted to be a bottom fishing buyer with a stop loss the other side of the March lows down at 0.88. Is it a UK listed company or is it a US? Hang on, what are they listed in? Pounds. Okay, they are listed in pounds. Okay, but it's been it's an absolute horror show, isn't it? Over the years. So for me, and I know there are loads of people who love penny stocks in the UK. You know, if they're at 96p and they used to be 18 quid, how much lower can they go? Well, they can still drop by 90%. Not that I'm saying they will, but I'm not a fan of penny stocks. But you know, for me, if I was a buyer now and they slip much below 90, I'd be tempted to get out. But let's see what happens. Right, we're going to wrap things up there, everybody. So apologies if I didn't get around to the one you wanted to look at. We'll do it. We won't be doing it next week because I'm away next week. But we'll be back the week after. We do regular updates throughout the week on the channel, so please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There's our stock channel where we look at individual stocks. Subscribe to that. The link is in the description. We'll wrap things up there. Interesting but difficult, I think, is a good way of explaining things at the moment. Stock markets, for me, still strong. Oil is interesting, given the fact it's been hit so much. I think it's an interesting market to watch next week. We'll wrap things up there. Find out more about Capital.com, go to the website. Any questions, drop me an email, david.jones@capital.com. We'll do it all in 2 weeks' time. Good luck with your trading, and we'll be back again with the live streams in September. Enjoy your weekend.